morning sun shines on the gleaming hide of a muscular ranch horse. The aroma of bacon and coffee drifts from the wood cook stove at a cow camp. Silver spurs jingle as the men and women of the West get set for another day in the saddle. From the heart of Canada's finest ranching country, this is the Spirit of the West with rancher and horse trainer Hugh McLennan and his collection of music, poetry, and conversations with the folks who live and work with horses and cattle in the Spirit of the West.
Back in July of this year, we received the sad news that another legend of the livestock industry had passed away. Ken Hurlburt, as so many of you already know, enrolled at the Western College of Auctioneering in Billings. That led to a career that the word distinguished falls far short of describing. He'd sold such prestigious sales as the Royal Winter Fair in Toronto from 1958 to 61, North America's largest bull sale in Calgary, and the PNE, where he sold the record high-priced Angus bull at $10,000 for E.P. Taylor. Along with his partners, Ken opened Fort Macleod Auction Market in 1960, the Highwood Livestock Auction in High River in 1984, and Pincher Creek and Cranbrook Auction Markets in 1993. He served as president of the Fort Macleod Rodeo Association, president of the Alberta Auction Markets Association, the Livestock Marketing International Association, a Calgary Stampede lifetime alumnus, and judged the World Auctioneers and Calgary Stampede Auctioneers Championship. He was mayor of Fort Macleod for 4 years and was twice elected Progressive Conservative Member of Parliament from 72 to 79, and that's just the start. Back in 2002, Billy and I sat down with Ken in the coffee shop at the Fort Macleod auction, and we were treated to some wonderful stories and some real cowboy logic.
A few drips of water would come down and the tube would blow in the amplifier, and then the PA wouldn't work, and we had 1,500 calves out there bawling. Then we'd have to go get a horse and get on the horse and sit on this horse in the middle of the ring and auction off the horse so the buyers could hear you.
The one and only Baxter Black will be along with something that will no doubt raise a few eyebrows.
It's a good thing animal rights folks don't listen to this radio program.
I wonder what that's all about. Cowboys and ranchers work very hard at range management, taking care of the grass, and that's one of the stories on this week's Rangeland News.
But then you have the stress from overgrazing, and then you've got a problem on your hands.
A working rancher who's also a great poet has something we can all relate to in the Cowboy Poetry Spotlight.
I'll just be brave, use the heifers I save, and try not to choke on fear.
You'll hear many of Ken Hurlburt's memories of trailing cattle to and from the market after Cecil Cravens drives his herd to Kansas.
I left my home in Texas last July, signed on with an outfit for a long trail drive. Well, I'm gonna see things I never saw. I hope we can make it to Wichita, pushing horns to Kansas, riding high. First few days, everything's just right. We got balmy days and 15 million stars at night. Well, it's the prettiest place I ever saw. I hope it's nice in Wichita, pushing horns to Kansas, hearts of light. Three weeks out and I've sweated through my seat. A cool drink of water and a little shade would really be a treat. Well, it's the hottest place I ever saw. I hope it's cool in Wichita, pushing horns to Kansas in the heat. 3 more weeks and it's raining up a flood. Red River's rising up so fast, we're all sweating blood. Well, it's the wettest place I ever saw. I hope it's dry in Wichita, pushing horns to Kansas in the mud. Now you'd better notify my next of kin. There's a gale blowing so hard I think these rocks are gonna bend. Well, it's the windiest place I ever saw. I hope it's calm in Wichita, pushing horns to Kansas in the wind. Now as a rule a man's a fool. When it's hot he wants it cool. When it's cool he wants it hot. What he's got he wants it not. Now the temperature's dropping, I'm froze down to my soul. Those steers are bunching up close at night. Now they don't act so bold. It's the chilliest place I ever saw. I hope it's warm in Wichita, pushing horns to Kansas in the cold. Hey, it's getting worse, can you hear that norther blow? There's a blizzard now, we can't see much, we're moving mighty slow. Well, that's the deepest drift I ever saw. I hope it's clear in Wichita, pushing horns to Kansas in the snow. Now we've made it, sold our herd, and I drew my pay. I had a few drinks, got a little poker game underway. Well, that's the crookedest game I ever saw. I hope I can get out of Wichita, pushing horns to Kansas, change my ways. Now I'm back home in Texas, saddled sore, and they're getting up another herd, gonna hit that trail like before. Well, that's the roughest life I've ever seen, but I hope it's nice in Abilene, 'cause I'm pushing horns to Kansas once more. I guess I'll be pushing horns to Kansas forevermore.
Well, back in 2002, as Ken Hurlburt took a sip of coffee and leaned back, our visit had begun.
There's a story I heard about you that goes back to Pincher Creek a number of years ago, and I think Warren Cooper is involved in this, but I've just heard little pieces of it around that you rode a steer into the ring or something at that time. Can you take me back to there and tell us what happened?
Well, it goes back to when I started. You know, I went broke in '52 when foot and mouth disease, and then an old order buyer here gave me $500 and talked me into going to auction school. And I went down there. To make a long story short, I came back and I was working the ring, and finally Warren Cooper, who was my boss, turned and he says, "Well, kid, you want to sell a steer?" I forget what they were worth then, about 13, 14 cents. And so I said, if anybody give me 20 cents for this steer, I'll ride him. And so a bunch of the local ranchers ran him in a corner, and I climbed aboard, and he was kind of dog gentle. Anybody could have ridden him. This is about the time they started using these prods, and two brand inspectors up there, they grabbed these two prods and nailed him, and boy, I tell you, he went across that ring. I did ride him to the other side, but he bucked me off, and that started my auction career.
Is that right? What did he sell for after that, do you remember?
20 cents.
He did bring 20 cents.
Yeah, he brought 20. And one of the buyers hollered and said, "I'll give you 20 cents if you ride him." And I think he brought a little more than that.
Is that right?
Yeah.
So then, did you start auction? You started selling right after that, along with Warren?
Oh yeah, yeah. I worked for Warren, and we traveled down into Saskatchewan, all over southern Alberta, from Pocokee to Whiskey Gap to Lundbrick and Pincher Creek and Macasto west of McLeod were all community auction sales.
Well, then, didn't you recreate that scene when Fort McLeod auction reopened the Pincher Creek auction?
Yeah,
a short time ago. What was it, 93?
Yeah, it was. They had a great big old steer, and I forget what he weighed, but quite a bit over a ton. And so they got me to ride him in and kind of recreate that scene of 43 years ago.
You'll hear more of the wonderful stories from that visit, and a pretty fitting piece of music when the Spirit of the West continues right after this. Welcome back to the Spirit of the West. Ken Hurlburt was 88 when he passed away on July the 17th, and back in 2002, he'd looked back on some of the things he'd accomplished up till then.
Well, I think it's great when you come as far as I've come in my auction career, and wouldn't have wanted to do anything else, and I've enjoyed every minute. Now today people say, when are you going to retire? Well, I've been retired all my life, I guess, because I really enjoyed what I'm doing. But some of the young guys starting today, they kind of like to hear some of the stories too. They can't hardly believe that all these cattle used to be trailed into these little yards, and a lot of times not one went out by truck. There were no trucks. They trailed them out, or they loaded them on a railway car. And they trailed them home, or they loaded them on cars and they went to the feedlots. And for instance, if we were selling a sale in Pincher Creek, and they'd load the feeder cattle on the cars, and those feeder cattle would stop off in Fort McLeod, or they'd go on to Lethbridge or Pictou Butte or McGrath or Raymond, and they'd have to be taken off and fed overnight in Lethbridge and then out the next day on another train, and that's how we moved the cattle.
Well, that sure has changed. What a sight that must have been if at the end of the sale or the day after the sale, and they're going to be trailed off to someplace else, to wherever their new home was going to be. Man, that must have been something.
Yeah, it really was. Yeah, and these feedlot areas like Pictou Butte and Raymond and McGrath, the cattle out of the feedlot, they used to turn them out right on the road allowance, and they'd trail those fat cattle right into the yards, and then we'd weigh them and load them on a railway car, and away they'd go.
Boy.
Yeah.
How that's changed. I guess that used to happen right here at Fort McLeod, right on this site we're sitting there, probably. Great bunches of cattle coming across the bald prairie and to the yards for sorting.
Well, that's right. They say one of the biggest roundups ever held was in 1885. Something like 10,000 cattle were rounded up, and I forget how many chuck wagons, so I'll tell you, we've come a long ways.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe seems almost like we've lost a little bit too in the traditional way of doing things and a little bit of the romance. But I guess you got to change with the times.
Well, I think we have too, but I think we got to take our hats off to those old timers that, it was pretty rough in those days, where all they had were buyers that come in and stayed in the hotels, and then they'd have to drive out to these ranches and bid on the cattle, then another guy'd bid on them. And they started the auction method of selling here back in 1939. And we really have to take our hats off, because that's the only competition they had, was to start this auction sale, because the only other competition were all these individual buyers that rode up and down the road allowance, and it created a great market for these people, and it was one of the greatest things ever happened to the industry. And I hope we're not getting away from that. I just hope now that you eliminate competition in anything, and pretty soon you have a dying industry.
Well, this conversation took place about a year before the U.S. borders closed to Canadian cattle. That was in 2003. What Ken had to say then still has real meaning, and it comes up after Jim Reeder and T.J. Casey help us get them cattle across.
The river's swollen higher, boys, we gotta get them cattle across. And it's raining like the Dickens, boys, and I can hear the cattle boss. It's thundering and lightning, so get aboard your horse. The river's swollen higher, boys, we gotta get them cattle across. I hear the train a-comin', boys, we gotta get them cattle across. And I hear that whistle blowing, boys, and I hear the cattle boss. He's roaring like a lion, so put the spurs to your horse. The river's swollen higher, boys, we gotta get them cattle across. The leaders took to water, looks like they're gonna cross. Keep your eyes on them quitters, boys, and listen to the cattle boss. Some's floating down the river, some surely will be lost. Keep your eyes on them quitters, boys, and get them cattle across. Yodelay, yodelay. Tomorrow will be drier, boys, 'cause most of them have crossed. But something just ain't right here, boys. Where the heck's the cattle boss? He must have went down the river chasing strays on his horse. Let's separate and find him, boys, 'cause we got them cattle cross. We found him in a tangled mess. The boss's life was lost, and standing on the river bank was his lonely riderless horse. We buried him at daybreak. Joe made a special cross. He died trying to save them, trying to get them cattle cross. Yodelay, yodelay.
Sitting there with Ken Hurlburt in 2002. We had no idea that the U.S. border would be closed to Canadian cattle within a year.
I've always been a firm believer that we share this continent with the United States of America. And we have just as smart a businessmen in Canada as we have in the United States. And we don't have to sell out to this country to do business with them. And our trade patterns are north and south in the United States, and they're north and south in Canada. They're not east and west. And we're going to do the industry a good turn if we make sure that these borders are so these cattle can flow north and they can flow south, because I think we can get along, and we have all these years, and we can continue to get along. And we better be pretty proud of the fact that it's the only unpatrolled border between two countries in the world. And I know we get a lot of these kind of people saying we shouldn't have a northern free trade agreement. I think we need a free trade agreement, and it's going to take time to put it into effect and to make it work, and it will work.
Well, I couldn't agree more, and I think that we have to be realistic about the way the world works and the way the economy works, and it's kind of nice to be a little bit parochial and fractionalized and balkanized and everything, but this is a real world we're living in, and to me the West is the West, and the West is going to survive on both sides of the 49th if we keep that in mind.
Absolutely. I agree with you, Hugh, and we got a bunch of free enterprisers, and still have in agriculture, and I just don't want to see our industry eliminate to the point where we have one or two big outfits dictating what's happening in the entire industry in North America, and it's happening a little today. But I think you'll see a turnaround. We'll get a few more packing companies move in and create competition, and that's the backbone of our entire industry is competition.
Next, Baxter Black has something you won't want to miss. It's one of his most hard-hitting commentaries yet, when the Spirit of the West continues right after this.
Howdy, friends. This is Baxter Black on Spirit of the West with Hugh McLennan, with a little peek at Zealots. What holds the loaded 30,000-pound trailer to the heavy-duty truck? What holds the 38-foot RV trailer to the dually? What holds the 2-horse trailer with your daughter's favorite pony to the half-ton pickup? Well, the odds are it's a B&W trailer hitch, probably a turnover bowl, American-made, employee-owned, customer-tuned, and proud of their part in America's greatness. B&W, holding things together down the road. Lord, spare me from zealots, Z-E-A-L-O-T, a noun, from the French zelos, meaning a fanatical partisan. The only thing worse than a light-hearted feller with no serious convictions is a serious person with no sense of humor. I have watched with interest the way the livestock industry has responded to the animal rights zealots. Well, boys, before you take them too seriously, remember one thing. They're crazy. Don't imagine for 1 minute you can treat them as logical human beings, people with sincere beliefs, but with a measure of common sense who will respond and listen to all the facts. I do not intend to argue their beliefs, mostly because I don't know where to start. Which animals have rights? Cattle? Starlings, hogs, mice, flies, cats, buffalo, trout, Pekingese spiders, chickens, parakeets. And which rights do they have? the right to be fruitful and multiply, the right to trial by jury, the right to Medicare and unemployment compensation, the right to bear arms, to minimum wage, the right to vote. Now, I admire anybody who has opinions, including these activists. Let them take their best shot. But let's not help them along. Don't have them on your programs and on your panels. Their strength lies not in the logic of their philosophy, but in the temporary attention they can attract. If this was a hungry country with bread lines and unemployment, do you think their tempest in a teapot would be given a second thought? To dignify their lunacy by inviting their accusations is to acknowledge that they are responsible thinkers, and I contend that no one, and I mean no one, has more knowledge of critters' feelings, is more concerned with their contentment, and has more personal interest in their welfare than the people who live their lives with animals. Us, animal rights fanatics, are rank amateurs. So don't treat him like some sort of semi-professional animal psychologist. Most of them wouldn't have the foggiest notion what to do with a scared horse, a bad-footed bull, or a scouring pig. And remember that. We don't have to back up one step around these people. Whew. I think my high horse got lathered up. It's a good thing animal rights folks don't listen to this radio program. They might find out we've got some lunatics on our side, too.
Who, me?
This is Baxter Black on Spirit of the West with Hugh McLennan, brought to you by B&W Turnover Bowl.
The Alberta Cowboy Poetry Association presents the 12th Annual Trails and Gathering, September 30th to October 1st and 2nd at the High River Full Gospel Church, honoring the history and traditions of the West with over 30 performers. Friday and Saturday daytime events are free to seniors. There's a cowboy church on Sunday at 10:30 a.m. and an open mic in the park at 2:30. Beef stew supper and pie and great Western entertainment and so much more. Get more information at albertacowboypoetry.com. For tickets, call 403-946-5482 or 403-649-2701. There's more memories of Ken Hurlburt in just a little while, and the Rangeland News has some pretty interesting items after a group of fellas who made some of the purest Western music ever during their performing years. These are the Rainsmen.
When it's autumn on the trail and the leaves have turned to flame, I seem to hear the breeze wandering through the trees, whispering your name. All along my lonely ride, how clearly I recall when we traveled side by side. It was autumn on the trail that you loved the most of all. Do you ever think of me? Do you remember the lovely plans we made by the campfire's last glowing ember? How I'm longing to return to the happy days we knew. Oh, my darling, how I yearn when it's autumn on the trail to be sharing it with you. Think of me. Do you remember the lovely plans we made by the campfire's last glowing ember? How I'm longing to return to the happy days we knew. Oh, my darling, how I yearn when it's autumn on the trail to be sharing it with you. Oh, my darling, how I yearn when it's autumn on the trail to be sharing it with you.
The news of the Rangeland, a roundup of news and coming events from around the West.
Top of page 1 on the Rangeland News, it says, most cattlemen understand the principles of good grazing practices, but in some years, selling cows is the only option. This is pretty elementary stuff, but anyhow, here's Rod Bain.
Pasture owners, you are probably well aware of what kind of damage overgrazing can do, especially if your livestock feed on the same pasture land throughout a hot, dry summer.
In the spring and the fall, we can often have maybe one or even more cattle per acre. In the summer months, the growth of the grass just cannot support that. And they'll get in there and they'll start to tear it up and graze it too low. And then not only do you have the stress from the heat and the drought, but then you have the stress from overgrazing, and then you've got a problem on your hands.
So Jeff Graybill of Penn State University Extension says rotational grazing is a perfect solution to this problem. If available land is an issue, especially on a smaller farm, Graybill says pasture owners can use sacrifice lots.
Whether you do rotational grazing or whether you don't, have an area where you can feed those animals, give them some hay, and give that pasture a rest if it needs it. That can really go a long way towards saving a pasture.
I'm Rod Bain reporting for the U.S. Department of Agriculture in Washington, D.C.
Wildlife officials have stopped trapping for a group of wolves suspected of killing livestock on private land near Grand Teton National Park in Wyoming. A Houston area police officer and 3 other men have been arrested in a cattle rustling investigation. And that's Houston, Texas, by the way, not Houston, B.C. Authorities say the 4 defendants, including Sugar Land police officer William Allen, are charged with engaging in organized crime activity, and the value of the cattle and the equipment stolen is said to be around $150,000. And the U.S. Bureau of Land Management is conducting what they consider to be an emergency roundup of approximately 60 horses that have strayed from the federal herd management area. The horses are mostly on private property 10 miles from the area, and the BLM told reporters the horses left the area due to declining water on the federal land. The contractor, Sampson Livestock of Utah, is conducting the roundup using bait and trap. And that consists of hay and water put inside temporary pens, and when the horses enter the pens, the gate is closed behind them, and supposedly they are captured. So far, 30 of the horses have been captured using this method. And once they're caught, they're sent to the Palomino holding facility where they're processed and either sent to adoption events or long-term pasture. The debt load of Canadian farmers will likely reach another record high this year while land appreciation slows and incomes flatten. But the industry is still in strong financial shape, the country's biggest agricultural lender, Farm Credit Canada, said in their latest forecast last week. While weaker crop prices have hurt farm incomes in many countries, weaker Canadian dollars compared to the greenback has softened the blow for Canadian farmers, giving them an export advantage over the U.S. The U.S. Department of Agriculture last month forecast U.S. net farm incomes to decline in 2016 to $71.5 billion U.S., and that is the lowest since 2009. Well, it's Monday, September the 26th at 10 a.m. It's a yearling and pre-sort sale at the Innisfail auction market. And calves need to be delivered by 4 p.m. Sunday. That could be today for some of you. Call them early to book. And, of course, the regular pre-sort sales will begin in October. And they also sell calves and yearlings at the regular Wednesday sales. Give them a call if you'd like to discuss your options. The Innisfail auction market number, 403-227-3166. And that brings us down to the final item. It's kind of a thought for the day for some of you guys. You see, while attending a marriage seminar dealing with communication, the old rancher Joe and his wife Ann listened to the instructor. It is essential that husbands and wives know each other's likes and dislikes, the instructor said. And he turned to Joe and he says, "Can you name, for example, your wife's favorite flower?" And Joe leaned over, touched his wife's arm gently, and he whispered, It's Pillsbury, isn't it? Yes, it was a quiet ride home. And that's the Rangeland News. A rider's having problems getting his horse to make a smooth transition from a walk to a trot. The horse jumps into the trot, but that's usually not hard to fix. And we'll look at it on the Horse Training File coming up. And then there's more of Ken Hurlbert's memories when the Spirit of the West continues right after this. Welcome back to the Spirit of the West. A rider is a little frustrated with his horse. He's had him for a few months. He rides him a couple of times a month, and whenever he wants to go from a walk to a trot, the horse jumps into the trot. Well, that's not usually too hard to remedy, and I'll give you my thoughts after another good song about riding in the fall from Richard Lloyd.
There's a little bit of restless in the mirror today. Not as many lines and wrinkles, few less miles upon my face. All the pains and aches, cuts and scrapes feel like they've never been. I get better from the ground up when it's roundup time again. Shorter days and longer shadows, they call me from the door. Ride 'em harder, push 'em farther than we've ever done before. Oh, the sky looks so much bigger and the stars shine twice as clear. Life is better from the ground up when it's roundup time of year. Tell Bill to saddle Tommy and I'll take old Jake. They're chomping at the bit, boys, they're pushing on the gate. They can't wait to be where the aspen trees sweep down to the winter range. We get wound up when it's roundup, some things don't seem to change. Got my rifle and my bedroll and an old black coffee pot. Got a whole week's worth of groceries in the back of the pickup truck. Maybe a little whiskey to keep the chilly winds at bay. I wait all year, it's finally here. Roundup starts today. Justin's got the gooseneck, he's headed up the road. We'll camp tonight on Buckeye Creek where the water's clear and cold. We can't wait to be where the aspen trees sweep down to the winter range. We get wound up when it's roundup, some things don't seem to change. We get wound up when it's roundup, some things don't need to change.
Now here comes this week's Horse Training File. I have a horse that jumps forward into the trot when asked to move from a walk to a trot. Any suggestions on how to make this transition smooth? Thanks. Well, this is a fairly common situation, and with most horses it's pretty easy to fix. The cause is often the rider being a little impatient and aggressive when asking the horse to move from a walk to a trot. Now, the same problem often arises when going from a trot to a lope. A rider's common reflex is to kick the horse in the ribs and sometimes smack him with the reins to increase the speed, and the horse can learn to resent that aggressive cue and will often pin his ears and jump into the trot. What I like to do is set aside enough time to work on this transition in a slow, consistent way, and if you do it right, the horse will usually make a beautiful, smooth transition in response to a very subtle cue. You can do it in an arena or out on the trail or in a pasture. Simply ride around at a walk on a loose rein if possible, and then just consciously work on bringing up your energy and sit up straight, squeeze slightly with your legs, and hold. Your horse will sense this subtle change in your riding posture and energy and will look for an appropriate response. which is, of course, to increase the pace and eventually move from the walk to the trot. Now, it might take quite a while the first time, but as soon as he starts to trot, release your legs and try and post in balance and give him real comfort with your body position. And you don't have to trot very far. The objective is for him to hold the trot until you ask him for something different, and he might nod on the first attempt, but that's not really a problem. Now, it could take a few days of working on this, but if you're patient, he'll find that soft response, and eventually it'll feel like you just visualize it, and he'll do it. And that's the Horse Training File. One of the finest equine establishments in Western Canada is now for sale. Horse in Hand Ranch has hosted world-class events and world-class clinicians like George Morris, Jonathan Field, and many more. The main barn has a state-of-the-art 230 by 90-foot indoor arena, attached 60-foot indoor round pen, 21 custom stalls with feed bins, rubber mats, and automatic waterers, 2 beautifully groomed outdoor arenas, and over 100 acres of country riding trails. Beautiful 5-bedroom, 5-bathroom home with 5,000 square feet of living space. A shop any horseman would love to have. Many quality outbuildings, turnout pens, and pasture. This facility has more wonderful features than we have time to mention, but you can find out more at klrtcommercial.com/horse-in-hand or call 403-887-1237. Well, my good gelding Stanley sure loves his daily feeding of Hoffman's horse ration, and after a hard day's work, he looks forward to it. And I think that's one of the reasons why he seems to be doing so well. You find out more at hoffmanshorseration.com. And you'll hear more of that memorable conversation we had with Ken Hurlburt back in 2002 after another song I sure like to play around this time of year. I love being horseback any time of the year, but there is something pretty special about riding in the fall. The bugs are pretty well gone, the air is crisp and frosty in the morning, the aspens are turning gold, and the sky is big and blue, and this is Ben Crane.
Gold aspen leaves are slapping, the fallen ones are scratching along the ground. My wild rag sets to snapping, and I wish that me and Spook was homeward bound. The sky is turning yeller, the boss cow starts to beller, soon the herd will head for cover in the trees. It started just this morning, the weather seemed to promise hot and dry. But it came here without warning, the cold front pushing flurries on a slide. Soon the ground will harden, and then we'll have to pardon the intrusion of another winter's freeze. Oh, the blue Alberta sky, oh, you're blue, and so am I. Somehow I'm never ready, but it comes on just as steady, and it leaves me longing for the warm embrace of the blue Alberta sky. We've brought the herd down lower, they're scattered all content like in my view. Life has gotten slower now that feeding is the only job to do. In wanderings my mind goes back to our little one-room square log shack, where you wait for me to come home once again. Oh, the blue Alberta sky, us only until we can finally claim our little piece of the blue Alberta sky. Oh, the blue Alberta sky.
Would you like to visit one of the most spectacular continents in the world with elegant accommodations, exotic destinations, amazing shore excursions, and a wonderful group of folks and the best guides you can find?
Where the deep blue pearly waters wash upon white silver sand.
Here's how you can do it. January 14th to February 4th, 2017, our cruise directors Jim and Karen Bell are hosting a 22-day cruise and tour of South America. This journey of a lifetime includes stops in Chile, Argentina, Uruguay, and the Falkland Islands. A private tour of famous wineries in Chile. A private tour to the Estancia Santa Susana with 1,200 acres devoted to agriculture, cattle, and horse breeding. Spend 14 days aboard the beautiful Crown Princess and 5 nights in Argentina, 2 nights in Chile in 5-star hotels. Now, this all-inclusive tour includes all shore excursions at all ports. A cruise escorted by Jim and Karen is the best way to create memories that'll last a lifetime. If you've always wanted to see South America, give them a call at 1-800-530-0131 and see cruise-vacations.ca. It was one of those visits you remember forever. In the Fort Macleod auction market with Ken Hurlburt, and we talked about how things have really changed since those early days.
But I think of the days when I sold with old Warren Cooper, and we'd have these old PA systems, the old amplifiers in those days. Of course, they were all tubes, and then we'd had a little shack with a kind of a little pitched roof over us, and the buyers the same, and an open ring, and then all of a sudden it would snow, and a few drips of water would come down, and the tube would blow in the amplifier, and then the PA wouldn't work, and we had 1,500 calves out there bawling. And then we'd have to go get a horse and get on the horse and sit on this horse in the middle of the ring and auction off the horse so the buyers could hear you. And but they were fun days.
Yeah.
Oh man, we had great times, and it's unbelievable. And now we go to these points and come back the same day. Well, we used to have to go and stay in a hotel in Lundbrick, and it took 2 and 3 days to go down there and take your crew down to.
Can you remember some of the longest times when you first started selling until the last animal finally went through? How many hours would that be?
Well, I think the longest sale we had, just after we started here, of course we didn't have the pens then and we couldn't accommodate them, but we started at 11 o'clock in the morning and we sold till 7 or 7:30 the next morning. We had to put cattle in railway cars and use them as pens or on trucks or anything else. But
I bet there weren't many mix-ups even then.
No, I'll tell you, great crews. And I've always said that you're only as good as the people that you wrap around you. And boy, I'll tell you, we've had some great people that started from day one and they're still here.
Much of today's conversation was published in the April-May 2002 edition of Canadian Cowboy Country Magazine, and you can subscribe to that great publication, by the way, by calling 1-800-943-7336. Another song I think you'll really like, and then a piece of cowboy poetry a lot of us can identify with when the Spirit of the West continues right after this. Welcome back to the Spirit of the West. You know, I love this guy's voice and the songs he writes. Gary Pratt manages a big ranch in Oklahoma, and he wrote this song for a movie documentary about a cowboy and his Appaloosa horse. They made an epic journey, and after a lot of adventures, the end of the trail was in sight.
The trail end. It's been a long time coming. Old Chip and old Hank are making their last ride.
those Kansas hills, full of beauty and wonder. The trail in will never end for these two friends. 5,000 miles, hundreds of trails. This horse and cowboy feel like colt and kid. Not a challenge unanswered by this aged Appaloosa. A race is won and freedom will always be their life. Long road ahead with storm clouds a-building. Mother Nature's fury, but there's blue in those western skies. The trail in for these two old compadres. The trail in will only end with his lost love. Small town of Dighton, alone in the distance, a graveyard looms. Hank's rode to his Lily, with his parents by her side, then lays her a gift that has taken most his life. A resting place for this horse and rider. His love is at peace, and now then, so is he. The trail in for these two old compadres. The trail in, yes, it will end with his lost love. The trail in, yes, it has ended with his lost love.
Well, the fall run is underway, and we're working together with our good neighbors, weaning calves and hauling them to the sale yards, and we are hoping that the buyers like them. And that leads into this week's Cowboy Poetry Spotlight with Floyd Beard.
I'm standing here pushing up a steer as I load the truck today. Looks thick and fat from where I'm at as I send him on his way. Yell out your bid or wave your lid as you catch the auctioneer's cry. Run up his price, you know he's nice, let him know that you want to buy. You hope each spring that your cow'll bring a calf of the buyer's type, so that next fall at the auctioneer ball, they'll all want to take a swipe. Now I ain't for gore, but a bidder's war between buyers is mighty fine, when they'll bid once more or the buyer next door and the calves they're wanting's mine. Then I go inside and I strut with pride as I settle at the cashier's till. Weight tickets come down and their times per pound, and the gold my pockets fill. What? I take the shrink? Is that fair, you think? And then the commission's pulled out, and the feed cost there for 2 days of care. Boy, that yardage is kinda stout. Well, they whittled my check, but what the heck, I better get what I got to the bank. Get your grubby mitts off my money, you nits. My ship came in, it's pretty near sank. You take out pasture costs, and the ones I lost, I'm barely gonna cover my bills. Still owe the vet charge, and the feed bill's large. Now I'm cutting out most of my thrills. Well, the trucker's paid, and the mortgage is made, and repair bills paid at the shop. Fuel's laid in, and the mill's pumping again. Boy, propane sure took a big hop. Well, I'll fix the roof next year and maybe see clear to get by on the tires I got. And I'll burn more wood. And maybe I could patch that tank where it's got the rot. I'll watch what I buy, and if prices stay high, I'll get by for another year. I'll just be brave, use the heifers I save, and try not to choke on fear. If I squeeze real tight, I'll make it all right, and there ain't no use to gripe. But if I got any pull, I pray that old bull will throw calves of the buyer's type.
Well, thank you so much for making the ride this week. And I sure hope you can join us right here next week at the same time. And I think we'll be able to bring you more memories of Ken Hurlburt, including his thoughts on his career in politics. Thanks again to our great support crew, Mark and Kathy McMillan. See them at meadowsprings.com. And I sure enjoyed the latest issue of Alberta Beef Magazine. Terrific cover story about Paige Stewart. Good one about Temple Grandin inside, and much more. And you can subscribe at albertabeef.ca. Till next week, I'm Hugh McLennan. Hope to see you down the trail somewhere real soon.